extra copies you can go leave with.
Yeah, you can just leave them with her, and then if you can grab a seat, I want to get her.
Dr. McCray.
Want to come join us? All right. I'm calling this hearing of the Boston City Council to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Boston's COVID-19 Recovery. This working session is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. Today's hearing is on Docket 0194, order for hearing regarding a review of COVID-19 recovery funds. That docket was co-sponsored by myself and Councillor Braden. I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Councillor Erin Murphy at large, Council President Ed Flynn, District 2, Councillor Julia Mejia at large, and Councillor Liz Braden, District 9. Just for a little bit of context, we filed this back in January, wanting an update on kind of where we were across all the federal funding that's come into the city for COVID recovery, and we had a hearing back in March. And we got a fairly full briefing from the city administration side on kind of CARES and ARPA funding to date. And we had some slides in that presentation that had been sent over from the BPS team, but we didn't have the BPS team with us. And we were still looking for a lot more definition on the ESSER plan, which was still very much in process at the time. And so we said that when they actually had the detail on their ESSER 2 and 3 proposals, and I'll let the team explain those acronyms, that we would have them back for a working session to discuss that. Because for folks watching at home, the federal government has sent almost $1 billion to the city of Boston for various COVID recovery activities, and almost half of that has gone directly to the school department. And so the council remains very interested in how that money is being spent, in the long-term sustainability of things that are paid for with it, and sort of like, and how it's addressing kind of critical issues at BPS. And so we've been wanting to have this hearing for a while, and we're thrilled that the BPS team is here with us. And I'll just note for counselors, you have a 2-page that the BPS team just passed out, but I do just want to flag for folks, I sent last night the longer appendixes and attachments to everybody, and so just if you have those PDFs up, they may be helpful to you over the course of the conversation. But we're joined here today by Nate Cooter, the Chief Financial Officer for Boston Public Schools, Serena LaRocque, the ESSER School Accountability Officer, and Yvonne McCray, our BPS Director of Grants and External Funds. So thank you all for being here, and I'll pass it over to Nate to kick us off.
Excellent, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back in the council chambers. I want to start by thanking you all for approving the BPS FY23 operating budget. That was a huge relief for me, and also a huge vote of support for us, and so I do appreciate your support. Looking forward to getting into the details of federal funding today, and we're going to start with a very brief presentation for you to set some context, and then turn it over to you as part of the conversation. And I should ask, this is a working session as opposed to a hearing. Is there anything I need to know or we should know as panelists in terms of how this operates? Or
No, this is just, we often do the follow-ups on dockets as working sessions. It just means that we're not obligated to take public testimony. Some working sessions we do, some we don't. Okay. But that's the main formal distinction in the council. A hearing always has a public testimony section, and a working session, often where we're like talking something through with departments, may or may not.
Okay, excellent. So I'm excited to share with you this update on the Return, Recover, and Reimagine, the 3-year plan for ESSER for greater equity and recovery. The COVID-19 global pandemic has highlighted and exacerbated longstanding inequities within our communities, while posing new challenges we had not even contemplated prior to March of 2020. One of the tools we have to address these inequities is the ESSER funding from the federal government. This one-time infusion of additional resources was designed to provide immediate relief to recover from the pandemic and address the new challenges created over the last 2 years. The funding was allocated over 3 years and flows through states to cities and districts. In response to the pandemic, Congress set aside approximately $13.2 billion for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. That is ESSER, E-S-S-E-R. The department awarded these grants to state educational agencies to provide LEAs, local educational agencies, including districts and charter schools, with emergency relief funds to address the impact of COVID-19 and had and continues to have on elementary and secondary schools across the nation. ESSER funds are distributed in 3 rounds. For BPS, this means that we received $431 million in federal ESSER funds. We also received $23 million as an additional allocation of what's sometimes referred to as ESSER 1 or the CARES Act funding. And then we received additional funding from the city of Boston through their CARES Act allocation, which is separate from ESSER. In total, BPS received $454 million to benefit the children of Boston. The BPS racial equity planning tool has been an integral part of our commitment to close opportunity and achievement gaps, leveraging ESSER funds. It was also a key asset to anchor the decision-making process of how to allocate our funds. We use the tool to ensure that we are driving towards our desired outcomes, grounded in data and community feedback to implement concrete strategies to address inequality. And so one of the themes you're going to hear from us continuously when it comes to the ESSER process has been community engagement. And I just want to note, as CFO, obviously I've been involved in the ESSER planning function from the start, but it's really Ava Mitchell, who is our Chief Accountability Officer, who's currently on leave, but has been really done most of the heavy lifting, and of course Serena LaRoque, who's here with us today, and Shira DeKovnik, who couldn't be here today. The team has, I'm leveraging a lot of their hard work, and so I can brag about the amount of community engagement that they did and the amount of listening that they did, because it's not my work, it's their work and the district's work, and so I'm proud to represent it here today. On average, about $50 million per year of ESSER investments are going directly to schools, representing more than 40% of the total ESSER funding over 3 years. Schools develop proposals collaboratively with their communities and submitted requests to meet federal, state, and BPS guidance. The remaining funds are reaching students through different channels. Over $200 million in district-wide investments are equitably distributed across schools, while building lasting district infrastructure. These programs, services, materials, and in some cases staff that benefit schools and their students directly, but they are planned, purchased, and supported from the central office. In addition, we're allocating $8 million in funding for future investments that will foster innovative practices across schools, and $10 million for investments to further strengthen community partnerships and support. As I mentioned, the school is receiving $50 million in FY22 and FY23. With the guidance of the ESSER Commission, which was our public group that we convened, included school leaders, superintendents, students, family, and teacher representatives. BPS is using a per-pupil formula where schools receive $813 for students with special needs who are English learners or have low-income designations. The funding formula ensures that schools with higher concentrations of students that fall into these high needs groups receive more funding. And it's important to note that if a student falls into more than one of these categories, then their school is receiving both allocations. So if they fit 2 categories, they're receiving not $813, but $1,626 for those students. And if they fall into all 3 categories, their school is receiving $2,439. And a school allocation is based on the total population of their school in those categories. On the central side, we focused on 7 key areas for ESSER funding. This guidance ensured that all ESSER investments were aligned to the strategic vision and included feedback from the broader community. The focus areas are designed with our students at the center, focus on what they need in order to thrive. You'll notice the instructional core is at the center of what we're talking about. This is about driving a change in student learning. And so the 7 categories are strengthening core instruction. We are accelerating our ongoing efforts to transform literacy instruction for all students in all schools. providing individualized academic supports students can access in and out of school. We're ensuring inclusion and quality supports for students with disabilities and funding a multi-year strategy to build inclusion classrooms within BPS and to identify and address root causes of disproportional referral to special education programming. Accelerating multilingual learning and providing better experiences for English learners. We are providing students with immediate access to interventions and supports while making long-term investments in learning experiences that celebrate and support linguistic diversity. We're creating high-quality pathways for student success and are dramatically expanding academic counseling, career planning, and rigorous coursework. This is the example of mass core that we talked about throughout the operating process, but really we're talking about increasing the number of academic opportunities for students. Delivering equitable access and opportunity for students, addressing how central office can support communities and distribute more resources equitably, and expanding access to the arts, athletics, and out-of-school enrichment. We're engaging with families and communities to more authentically design the ways families will receive information and expanding social, emotional, mental health supports the students receive. And then finally, the seventh category is improving school environments. This is about our facilities and the environments that our students live and learn in every day. We're making unprecedented investments in clean air and water, addressing COVID health and safety concerns, and are setting up long-term improvements to how we maintain our buildings. And finally, I just want to note that there's more information online for those of you who want to go to our website. I put the link in this slide. There's the detailed ESSER report, which I shared with the City Council last night, will be posted online for families to be able to download and dive into. Includes details on school-based plans and spending plans for the district. There's also updates on past community engagement, so you can see notes and presentations from past experiences, as well as diving into school-based allocations so you can see individual schools. With that, that ends my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Councilor Bach for your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Nate. I'm going to start with a couple of questions and then I'll go to colleagues. And I want to note that we were joined right after you started speaking by Councilor Frank Baker from District 3. I guess, can you talk to me a little bit about the guardrails that schools were given for the school allocations in terms of like the types of things? I understood you talked about how sort of you decided on how much money each school got, but in terms of like the types of things that people could or couldn't. And all of my questions today are going to focus on this question of like, how do we make sure that we're setting up sustainable supports for our schools? You know, because what I really don't want to see happen is sort of like it's great to have a surge of spending for ARPA, but then to have it withdrawn, I think will just be really hard. So I want to understand what the constraints were for schools.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to turn it over to Serena to be able to answer in more detail. I just want to say from a high level, when we did the allocation at the school level, part of the rationale was to make sure that decision-making was closest to the students. And we recognized and sort of informed schools up front this would be temporary funding. This, grant funding that comes into schools is treated very differently than operating budget. And so the guardrails were being developed as we were working with schools and having conversations with schools so that they were giving us feedback on what they were trying to do. And Serena and her team have spent a lot of time talking with individual school leaders, but why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about the guardrails and particularly the sustainability?
Sure. So the first part is across the district and schools, we all had to stay within the 7 focus areas that Nate Cooter mentioned. So things such as within inclusion, thinking about multilingual learners, right? So that was the first guardrail. The second guardrail is that it had to be aligned to their school improvement planning. So it had to be grounded in their data that they're observing. It had to be part of their whole school improvement process. The next thing that we did was that it had to be part of a community engagement, school community engagement process. So that means that they had to engage their governing board, their equity roundtable, their ILTs, and other members. So those were the kind of the high-level guardrails that schools did, if you just asking for the guardrails.
Okay, and then can I ask like an example? So at the very end of the school appendix, like the Young Achievers case, one of my challenges skimming through the school stuff was it wasn't always clear. There was a lot of talk about what schools were trying to achieve and progress measurement, et cetera, but it wasn't always clear like what the dollars were actually paying for, which I would just say is something that, at least at the council level, I think we want to know. So, so for instance, here it said, you know, our plan will allow for support in addressing greater access for academic supports in and out of the classroom, along with social emotional concerns. But I was just trying to understand, like, is there supplemental staff hired in that case? Like, what's the actual spending?
Sure. So when schools submitted their request, they had to submit through an ESSER proposal. And so the information that is in the appendix is a summary of their priorities and how they described, you know, the efforts in which, but they also had to include a separate expense sheet for us. So for example, before we released the funds into their budget, we looked at things such as personnel, we looked at things such as contractual services. So on our end, in terms of what they had to submit, they did have to submit the priorities, how they engage the community, and also an actual expense sheet.
Yeah, so it's an information request, just the council would like the actual expense sheets as well. Like that's very much from a budget perspective an important thing for us to have on file, so it'd be great to have that. And then on district side, when I was counting through it last night, it seems like of the district-wide expenses, I found you guys adding 132 FTEs, plus there's a couple facilities and nurses where it's not clear how many you're adding, but it seems like the number across district-wide might be like 150 full-time equivalents. So can you talk to me, and this might be a Nate question, kind of what's the theory around, like, that's a lot of staff. They're all doing exciting things, but in 3 years, the budget drops off, and like, what's sort of the thinking?
So some of I think that the central office investments can be thought of in a couple different categories. The first is some of these are investments that are likely to require future operating support or us to identify efficiencies in other ways, right? So this is the sort of the area that you would flag as a particular concern because it's betting on future investments. So that the areas of those are they're approximately, it's the academic counseling piece. The first part is the 9th grade counseling, and then the K to 8 academic counselors, which the implementation has actually been slow to start given the other recruitment needs that we have as a district. But it also includes, you know, pieces of work that we are interested in making investments in that we were not able to prioritize for FY23 operating budget. So athletics, recruitment, cultivation, and diversity, some data infrastructure, and special education capacity. The other piece are pilot programs that we want to see if they work, can be either considered sort of pilots overall or things where we know that we need to do some more intensive recovery work, and if it turns to be part of our basic operations going forward, it doesn't sort of fit into the neatly sort of isolated academic recovery. So things like community hub schools, acceleration academy, social emotional learning, coaching, school leader pipeline work. These are all things that are critical needs right now that we need to make investments in, right? To recruit staff, recruit good leaders, to be able to provide additional intensive social emotional support for students during this period of transition. We may also need to continue that, but that's also the type of recovery work that can be short-term as COVID response. That's approximately $18 million a year and is approximately 71 FTE.
18,071 FTE in that category, you think?
Yes.
And how many in the first category?
In the first category,
And how much money?
21 million per year, and that's the largest bucket. It's 139 approximate FTEs.
Okay, so it's more than I thought.
The academic counselors being the largest chunk of that, about 100 academic counselors was the original proposal. It'll be likely scaled down for next year.
Okay, and can you just tell me, in the big packet, there are two things that I couldn't get an actual FTE count. So the healthy and safe school facilities, where it says staff members to add service capacity, how many people are we talking about?
Yeah, I do have that. Hold on.
And then similarly, in cases in the same place in the spreadsheet, the centrally deployed nursing staff and health paraprofessionals, if you had a number on that.
Sorry, can you repeat the second category for me?
The returning to healthy and supportive schools, the centrally deployed nursing staff and health paraprofessionals. It's right after in the plan. It's all right if we do it as a follow-up. It's fine.
I have the, I apologize, the number of ESSER funded. I'm gonna have to ask that as a follow-up. I'm gonna see
Yeah,
if I have-
that's fine. If we can, if you guys can even find it by the next.
So the nursing support staff was 18 FTE, the facilities piece on the
Okay.
list I had that I thought was
Okay,
operating, so.
but it does seem like we're well north of 200 new people.
Yeah, the number of FTEs is, yeah, well north of likely 200 new FTEs.
Right, okay. So just want to flag a concern about that, but I'm going to go to colleagues next, and I can come back in the next round. First here was Councilor Murphy at large. Councilor Murphy, you have the floor.
And thank you for being here. Probably the last time, right? So when the new superintendent starts, how much authority will they have to make changes to this plan, if any?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think part of the purpose of doing a long community engagement and having so much community feedback is to make sure that we were really aligned to the guardrails that our community wants. So I do think that the new superintendent will need to understand within these guardrails what the goals of ESSER was, and will probably, I think there's a lot of maneuverability within each of these plans because there's still a lot of implementation to be done. So the way we design, the way we implement, how we support. There's, in a lot of these categories, the departments are working through different spending proposals for the superintendent to come in. I also think the reality is, particularly on the FTE side, recruiting has been much more difficult this year, as many of you know, and this is not just a public sector issue, it's across all sectors. And so some of the spending plan that was intended to be an FY22 spending will need to be sort of rethought and deployed. So there will be flexibility within that for the new superintendent to think about and sort of redeploy. Okay. But I do think the core tenets of this plan are addressing the core issues we have as a district, things like equitable literacy, inclusion, the need for greater partnerships with the community. These are all things that I would anticipate a new superintendent getting on board with, even if the implementation strategy may be different.
Okay.
Not to, of course, pigeonhole my future boss.
Yes. How many unfilled teaching positions do we have now at this ending this school year? Do we know how many we went this year unfilled? And then a second question is going to be, do we know how many leadership principal positions we have right now for September that we know principals have left and we need to fill, or shifting schools?
I apologize. I do not have that information in front of me, but I can definitely work with our Office of Human Capital and follow up.
Awesome. And to follow up on something Councilor Bach started to talk about, I know when you look at Talent Ed, many of the job postings say temporary because they are being funded by ESSER.
Yes.
So
schools are choosing to temporarily hire certain positions, and how many of those do we know? And will those be filled before permanent positions? Is there a conversation already happening with human capital and the union around those jobs? Because if we're filling extra positions at schools when we don't have classroom positions already filled, it can become an issue quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that comes in a couple different forms. I know that part of the consideration of implementation for central office initiatives was to make sure we did those staffing and hiring earlier so that we don't end up pulling teachers late in the hiring process from schools and create a shortage at the school level. Part of our reasoning around potentially not moving as aggressively on the K-8 counseling is around this challenge of school-based staff and needing to hire. Within individual schools, most of these are from conversations with individual school leaders about how they're thinking about their staff. I think a lot of them are recognizing the temporary nature of a number of positions that they have, not just the ESSER funded positions, but we talked a lot about the size and scope of soft landings. And so I think what you see from different school leaders is this sort of balance of the immediate need of the students that are in front of them and then thinking about what budget season will look like next year.
Okay.
And I know that's a tough position for them to be in, but I think they're really focused on the kids that they have now and making sure they maximize those supports.
Quickly, before my buzzer goes off, well, really quickly, health paraprofessionals are specific to paras to nurses, or will they be helping support health class, nurse, science teachers, gym around mental health curriculums and health classes? Or are they being assigned to the nurses?
In this case, my understanding is the health paraprofessionals are related to the sort of nursing staff needs.
Nursing.
I'd have to follow up
Not
to find out.
classroom teaching, science, health classes, okay. And this came up yesterday in a working session around our opera funding, and 15 million of our money from this side, from the mayor, is proposing goes to early childhood education. And I had brought up yesterday wondering if, like, the new department that we have in early childhood here, is that something that we can consider spending ARPA funding on? That why are we spending it here on our side in the, ESSER funding on school money to be spent to invest and support the financial health of our creative K0, K1 spots, which I know some may have to be outside of a BPS building, but they'll be students who will then continue in BPS schools, and those teachers will hopefully be early childhood BPS teachers, even if they're outside of a school building. So wondering why we're picking that up on the opera side if it can be funded through the ESSER fundings, which you have more money on top of the $1.33 billion school budget. You also have $450 million in ESSER funding.
My understanding for the community-based partnerships for K0, K1 expansion, that there is a city-side investment to be able to support the universal registration and being able to streamline that and make sure that there's consistent registration experiences across our early childhood partners and BPS, sort of as a city-wide partnership. And so it certainly is something that would sort of be eligible for ESSER funding as opposed to some of the other sort of BPS adjacent investments on ARPA. It's just not something that we had put as part of our plan.
But it is possible, because I know just like we are going through the budget amendments, for us to propose something, we have to then say where it's coming from. So counselors are feeling there are many things that got cut out of budget options, and if we could get them funded through opera funding, this could be a place where we're getting that money back on our city side. So
yeah, from a management perspective, the UPK initiative through the trust over the last few years has been a joint partnership with the city and BPS and city supported. I do think there's value in this being a sort of a non-BPS oversight and management, just because, so it's to be partners with the community agencies. I think that works really well. I think obviously Kristen McSwain's very talented and brings great leadership to that. So her oversight of that project, I think, works really well. And I know she's got a great partnership with Jason Sachs on our side to be able to deliver those services.
And that's our fear, though, here. It's a one-time ARPA funding, and when that money goes, do we continue to be able to support that program? And if it's in the BPS budget, 15 million is very small for the 1.33 billion that it would continue.
The funding for the seats, the community-based partnership seats, and the programming overall is a combination of the trust and then also BPS funding. And so when the funding for the trust runs out, it does become part of BPS's overall budget. And that's been a consistent multi-year effort to expand K-1 seats. My understanding is that the funding is for the one-time system implementation of setting up a new universal registration system. And that fits more into the category of one-time projects to get it up and running, where it has multiple years of benefits for us. So I don't think it has the same sustainability risk as the ongoing costs which we incur.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Next up is Councilor Flynn, and then it'll be Councilor Mejia. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your important leadership, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists as well for your work. I had the opportunity, I was talking to Nate earlier, had the opportunity to join my colleagues in the mayor yesterday for the groundbreaking of the Carter School on the border there of the South End and Roxbury, and what an exciting opportunity and exciting day for the students and the school community. So want to thank the BPS team for working closely with the state through the Mass School Building Authority under the State Treasurer's Office. So my question is, what is the current status of the HVAC systems in our school buildings? This is an issue I've worked closely with Councilor Flaherty on. Are all our schools now, as we end the school year, but going into the fall or going into August for the start of the new school year, will we have AC and working heat for all school buildings now with so much federal money?
I'm going to take the last part of that first. And first of all, thank you for going to the Carter and being a longtime supporter. As I said before, you've been a consistent advocate for students with disabilities, and I'm very excited about the Carter School project as you are and the community is. All of our schools have working heat that has been consistent, and the part of the indoor air quality monitoring system and heat monitoring system is for us to get better information to be able to triage any challenges that we have without having to rely on calls from individual teachers or school leaders. For HVAC systems, there are a limited number of schools that have full HVAC in the buildings. And those systems we're continuing to do investment in upgrading maintenance, and that was a big part of the filtration investments that we made on the first CARES Act funding. We are rolling out a plan to have air conditioning in all schools, but it's not a full HVAC system. Just want to note, it's just, in some cases, it will be modified window units. The way that the team has organized is by focusing on our highest needs schools first, and then basically working down the list. And so there will be a number of schools that will have air conditioning in place for fall, but there will be a number of schools where we'll be implementing air conditioning over the next year or 18 months. It's going to take us that much time with supply chain issues and just the project overall. So not all schools will have AC in the fall, but there is a plan for all schools to have air conditioning at the end of this funding.
Okay. Yeah, spending federal funds on bringing up and improving our HVAC systems in our schools is critical, and I think it's money well spent. And then my final question is, it's relating to BPS, but it's also relating to BCYF. Certainly you guys have a partnership. One of my main priorities was providing kids in BPS with swimming lessons. And a lot of kids in the city don't know how to swim, even though we live right on the ocean, and we have so many pools or lakes around. But do we have a list of BPS, BCYF pools that are not operational, or that are operational, that need significant infrastructure investments?
I can reach out to the facilities team and get that information for you. I don't have that list available now.
Okay. And it's my goal, working with my colleagues here, to get every kid in BPS, but every student really across the city, into swimming lessons. I think it's critical. I think it's a life and death issue. A lot of immigrant kids don't know how to swim. A lot of kids of color don't know how to swim. Kids from public housing development haven't been exposed all that much to the ocean or the harbor islands. So I think we really need to make significant investments in swimming lessons and swimming pool infrastructure improvements so that kids from Boston are able to learn to swim, and including students with disabilities as well. So going forward, I'm going to maintain working on that issue. It's something I've worked on for the last several years, but I think we really need to do a better job in terms of improvements in our BPS, BCYF pools, providing swimming lessons to all kids. We have a partnership with the YMCA that we need to improve on. But any thoughts that you have on that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. In the athletics proposal for ESSER, there is an inclusion for increased pool maintenance. This is not to bring more pools online or any sort of capital repairs, but the goal is sort of twofold: to increase the ability for us to make third grade swimming more feasible. That goal of providing kids the opportunity in third grade to learn swimming. And so the other piece is to make sure that we can keep our pools open for longer in the year, so increasing access to the pools that way. That's currently part of the proposal. It's not going quite as far as you're asking for, but it is part of the work that needs to be done for our pools.
Okay. Yeah, I think we really need to refocus our energy and efforts on that issue. As I mentioned, I don't think we're doing enough. And when I'm in the South End or Dorchester or South Boston, that's what parents are asking me. They say, where can we go swimming around here? We don't have a pool, or where can we get swimming lessons for our kid? We live in the Cathedral public housing. Do we have the opportunity to go swimming? And it's frustrating to say to them, no, you can't, because we don't have any pools, or we don't have any swimming lessons, or there's nothing available. But in the wealthiest city in the country, with all these colleges and universities, we need to do a better job of providing after-school activities, swimming, or various programs for students of Boston. I look at the colleges and universities. They have outstanding swim teams and dive teams. And can we get any of those types of students interested in working with the BPS as a per diem, as a lifeguard, so that we can get those students into the pools, teaching kids how to swim? Well, that's my priority. So hope BPS and BCYF will continue to work with me on that, because it's something that we really need to focus on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. Next will be Councillor Mejia, then Braden, then Baker, and I should have noted before that we were joined by Councillor Gabriela Coletta from District 1 and Councillor Brian Worrell from District 4. Councillor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just curious about, you said you went through an extensive community engagement process? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just curious, if that is true, how did we land only on $1 million for student and family engagement supports, where we know, having been on a number of hearings, that families don't feel heard or engaged, and everything that comes to them is an afterthought. And so I'm curious, how did we land on just $1 million for family and student engagement out of all of that money?
It's interesting to note that there's a couple places where there is the intention to increase our capacity to do engagement, which is part of the $1 million that we're talking about here. It's sort of in the family and community engagement team around greater access to sort of redesigning some of our online tools and things like that. The other piece is in both the Bill BPS sort of Green New Deal proposal, there is capacity to build engagement on that team, because that's been an area where we've struggled to engage, and I know that's a place where the community feels like their voice has not been heard. So there's capacity there. It's part of the facilities proposal, not as an explicit engagement piece. And then on the finance side, we're doing our Reimagine School Funding project to rethink how we allocate school funding overall, which includes funding for community engagement. So I think part of that is to embed within big projects engagement resources to make sure that those projects are successfully engaged with the community.
So let's dive deeper into that, right? When you're talking about redesigning tools, are you also taking into consideration that folks who are struggling to read and write, even in their native language, like how are you seeing community engagement reimagined?
Yeah, this is something that you've mentioned before that has, I think is really interesting and important, that it's not just about written translations or sort of written communications, but being more creative about our use of video and audio to be able to get messages out to our families. We haven't done anything that I'm aware of, but I could go back to the communications. We, of course, have a new chief communications officer and acting engagement person, so.
Okay, now let me get into some of my other questions before the buzzer goes off. You know, when I think about recovery and reimagine and all that, those efforts, I think about the students who are chronically absent and who you have struggled to bring back into your classroom, right? And so I'm curious, and I've been fighting for, I'm sure you're familiar with the Youth Development Network. Are you? The Youth Development Network.
Yes, at the higher level, not.
Yeah, so they work in Madison Park, Brighton, Burke, Charlestown, a lot of the highest needs high schools, and they provide intense case management to students who are chronically absent. And so if the goal of this funding is to help support students, where do you see an opportunity for more investments on engagement for those who are chronically absent and not thinking about going back to school? Where's that here?
I think there's a couple places where it exists. And certainly part of what our allocations directly to schools are to be able to support our highest needs students and to have schools be able to sort of design and implement supports for those students. And yeah, go ahead.
But I'm not hearing anything specifically around what we know is that chronically absent students have, post-COVID, has been a big challenge to get them back into the classroom. So I'm just curious about, when you think about ESSER funding, where do you see that? And I do have one more question, so I just want to make sure that we can get to. I just want to understand how you guys are prioritizing. I know you have buckets. I understand the metrics that you guys use to figure those things out, but I haven't heard anything around chronically absent students. And I'm just going to encourage you all to consider that, because those are the ones who have yet to come back. And if we're really serious about making sure that we're utilizing these dollars, I think we should figure out how we can make some more explicit investments in chronically absent students, which is one of the things I'm going to be advocating for in how you utilize some of these dollars to support those students.
Sure, so there's, I can give an example. There's one explicit central office investment, that's the mini grants, and it's part of an incentive to bring students back into the school, engaging with families. There's also investments with working with our social workers. So it's showing up in different various ways, but on the central office side, I don't want to take your time, but on the central office side, that's one example.
Okay, so can you just talk to me about, you mentioned some pilot programs, Nate. Are these going to be ones that get designed by central office? Or are you going to hire, are they going to get contracted out? Like, what's your vision for inclusion on your pilot programs?
That was specifically about special education inclusion?
Yeah, no. You just mentioned that there's going to be several pilot programs earlier.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple different ways that, and it's driven primarily by each individual central office that's working on the initiative in their capacity. So as Serena mentioned, the Opportunity Youth Department is doing mini grants, providing sort of guidelines and sort of coaching support for schools to be able to develop their
But will those be
school-based programs.
contracted out? Like, will those be opportunities to contract minority business vendors and partnerships? Like, I want to beyond central staff, like, because central staff is central staff, and there's a lot there already. So how are we going to share the wealth? That's what I'm trying to get at. And then you talked about full-time employees. You're going to be hiring over 200 new employees. And I'm just curious about what's going to happen when you run out of the funds. Are you going to let them go? What's going to happen to those 200 employees that were hired during this process? Then what happens to their long-term financial outcomes when you run out of money?
Yeah, so I mean, this is I think the challenge for an infusion of cash with a short period of 3 years and this amount of money is that it's hard to think about recovery investments and tutoring supports and programs without adding FTE. I started off this process by saying that I don't think we should hire any full-time staff because it's a huge concern. But as we start to think about the implementation of programs, it's just not realistic. And so we do have tough work ahead of us as a district and as a city around sustainability that includes the $130 million a year of new spending that ESSER represents, and then also the $50 million in soft landings that we've taken on the operating side. And so I do think that's a conversation. It's part of the reason we've launched the Reimagine School Funding Project, to really have that process of how we want to step down from this current system. But it's also a question about what do we want to see in all of our schools and how many schools do we want to operate.
Yeah, thank you. One more question to the chair, though, to you, Madam Chair. This is the working session, right?
Yeah.
And then are we going to come back? Are we going to be voting on this
No.
ever?
No.
We don't have any vote on whether or not they're going to get money?
We don't have appropriating power over this money.
So I'm just wasting my time.
But one of the reasons that we wanted to have this was because of kind of what Councilor Murphy raised, or the fact that obviously the school department is under the overall administration, and there are things that maybe we may feel should move between ARPA and ESSER. So. That's what the question. No, I mean, it's an open question. So. But I think that what I would say, Councilor Mejia, is that with this amount of money going to the school department, it would be irresponsible for the council not to have some understanding of what is being proposed regardless. And one of the challenges that I'm worried about is sort of related to what you just asked. Basically, in some ways, these are budget decisions that will come to the council. They'll just come to the council 3 years from now because of the continuity question. So that's why we have them here. But I agree with your view that it would be good if we had more appropriation power here. I hear Councilor Baker in the background. Oh, okay. Thank you, Councilor Fernandez Anderson, who has also joined us from District 7. All right, then I'm going to jump in for the moment, and we'll go to Councilor Coletta.
Oh, Braden?
Oh, I skipped you. I'm sorry, Liz. Councilor Braden, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Okay, this is an incredible amount of money, and spending it responsibly and in a short period of time is a challenge. I'm glad that we're doing the HVAC thing, because with climate change, we're going to see heat waves in September and May outside of regular school vacation time. So I think that's a really important investment. I'm just thinking, you know, the whole idea of this money is to help us repair the damage that has happened in the course of the pandemic. And I would just love to get a little insight into the need for compensatory education, especially for our special needs students, and how students who are special needs, you know, the transition planning from school to adult life, a lot of that is sort of really experiential learning that I don't know what the setup is. I need to visit more schools, I think. But my understanding from my experience in working with blind children was that blind students, that the experiential learning and job readiness, work skills and independent living skills are an important piece of that transition plan. And I imagine that our students who've experienced, who are at that age between sort of 18 and 22, who are graduating from special ed programs, that they missed out on a lot of that experience. Are we working to repair that? And then the other question I had was really with regard to early education and early literacy. Like you and I have talked a lot about this, the importance of reading and getting kids prepared so that they're reading at grade level by third grade. So again, I imagine that there's a lot of, that their learning has been interrupted by the pandemic. So what resources are we really putting in to jumpstart the early literacy piece, so that to be really getting down into the granular specifics of how we're going to address those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first, in terms of special education compensatory services, this is a huge need for us as a district. And we have set aside money to be able to provide additional services. This is an individualized process, and so we have some high-level projections of costs, but it's really, at this point, each individual IEP team needs to understand the student goals, and from there, if the student's been off track or have not been able to receive services because of the disruption, then the decision about what new services and costs will come out of that is an individualized team decision. And so we are prepared to support it and be able to provide more resources to students that need it. You're flagging a really critical issue for those 18 to 22-year-old students, and a lot of the work that's done for a lot of our high school programs before they get to 18 for that transition. I know that's been an area of focus of the council in the past for us to be able to provide that. I don't have any more details about, I'm sure that there are many people on the special ed team who are concerned about those students, as you are. I think that's a really important thing to flag. I think you're also talking about the importance of literacy, is why equitable literacy has been the focal point of our academic strategy, both on the operating side and in ESSER funding. And I was just noting for the superintendent how this time last year we had a team meeting where the academics team outlined for us, sort of non-academic folks, what they're talking about when they say equitable literacy. And for a non-educator like me, that was really important for me to understand. And the piece that really stuck with me was, it's about access to grade level text for every student in every grade in every program. And the concern is that how often that doesn't happen, right? So if you're a student in a special education program or a student who's not reading at grade level, they still need access to grade level text every day, even if they can't read it on their own. And so we need to be providing the equitable supports, the resources that they need, what educators call scaffolding, supports, to be able to make sure that they're getting access to that grade level content, because otherwise they're being left behind. They're not only not reading at grade level, now they're not getting grade level
Any
science,
exposure.
they're not getting grade level math, they're not getting grade level history, all of these things. This becomes a huge equity concern, it becomes a huge academic concern, and it becomes a huge safety concern for our students who are not able to access through, as Councilor Mejia was mentioning, written word is an important safety issue. It's how you get your medicine, it's how you get your safety information, it's how you navigate life. And so this was the focus point of equitable literacy, and all of the supports that are on that are about providing the right curriculum resources, providing the right teacher training to change our habits, right? So that it's understanding how you both bring somebody up to grade level and provide them that access at the same time and not compromise on that. And that is our core work as an organization. It's our core work for COVID recovery. And it's something that I need to learn a lot more about to be able to support from a finance perspective, because my job is to really bring the infrastructural resources to the teachers who are trying to do this in a different way. I think we could talk about this, and the experts could talk about this every day, almost all day. The last thing I'll say is certainly early childhood is important. I think what we're seeing is that students who are in first, second, and third grade right now are the critical grades, because they're the ones who early childhood, they had the most disruption during that foundational reading time. When you get into fourth and fifth grade, those are teachers who are not used to sort of teaching foundational reading. And so it's interesting, I have a daughter in K2 and a son in fourth grade. And both of them my son was established as a reader before the pandemic, and my daughter is now being established as a reader coming out of the pandemic. So I've, in some ways, dodged those critical 3 years. That's a focus for our academics team, and that's where that cohort of students needs greater intervention and support, and the teachers that are now going to be in second, third, and fourth grade teaching skills that were disrupted by remote learning or by missed learning during the pandemic. So that was a long, broad, sweeping, I think but you're touching on some really important work and the core of our academic recovery work, I think.
So in a recent conversation with a principal in a high school, they said, we were talking about reading and readiness skills for early, and he pointed out that actually one thing we don't have is reading specialists in high school, and so now we've gone to the is it seventh? High school starts, 7th grade.
Yeah.
That there are students who arrive in high school and they're not up to speed with their reading skills, and that actually that some investment in reading specialists in high school, especially as we're bringing kids into high school at a younger age, that would be a worthwhile investment, that we could jumpstart some of the literacy and the reading skills, because it's a sad fact that we have students who graduate or leave school or drop out of school, and they don't have basic sort of reading skills, survival skills in reading, and they become adults that are not readers or writers, and it's very sad. So, even looking at that issue about just reading specialists in high school would be another issue. I think the literacy piece is critical to just helping kids succeed as they leave, as they go out into the world.
I can imagine the school leaders you'd be talking to, and I know a particular one school leader in Brighton who has a lot of experience at the K-8 level, right? So he's seen teaching instruction. Andrew Bott, the head of school for Brighton High School, was at Orchard Gardens and led that turnaround work. So that kind of experience of going from K0, K1 literacy all the way now and supporting a 7 through 12 expansion.
And this was actually a principal from another high school,
yeah,
right?
So
I was talking about this
I guessed
issue.
wrong, but I think you're absolutely right, and and as part of the work around equitable literacy is understanding how do you support students. I think you're right. If you're not at grade level or you're not able to read at the high school level, do we have the supports to get the student?
I think the other issue is this, even literacy is literacy, like exposing students whose English is not ELL students to, and families to books, and even if it's in Spanish or Portuguese, it's helpful to, because literacy they develop those skills in their first language, it translates into literacy in English as well. So,
Absolutely.
and I hear the bell going off, so I'm going to get kicked out in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Next up, Councillor Baker. Councillor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have a vote on this? Are we
We do
having this
not. We
because?
just
yeah.
talked about that. We are having this because it seems insane for us not to ever find out about the details of this. So that's why we're having it.
See my issues I'm having, Madam Chair?
Well, this.
I'll
this-
move on. You don't need to respond to that.
Councillor Baker, we've never had a vote on.
No, I know.
on
I know.
appropriations through the school
I know,
committee.
400 million, wave them around third. Nate, can you talk to me about community hub schools? What do you mean when you say a community hub school? What does that look like? Or what are we doing for the hub model? I have in my head what I think it might be, but can you tell me what is in your head?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to turn it over to Serena to be able to talk in more detail. I think there are a couple different models that we're working on for community hub schools. And this is the first part is to implement it at a select number of schools so that we can, and then continue to roll out more hub schools as we go. But
So the community hub model was being piloted in a certain amount of schools. And so basically it's fostering well-being through restorative justice programming, expanded social work services, developing strong partnerships with the community and family. And so those are just some examples of the community hub school model. I think we can't necessarily speak in detail of the programming. That's another office that manages that. But basically what we're wanting to do with the ESSER funds is to scale this community hub model, because we're realizing that there's a lot of benefit in partnering with the larger community and also thinking about restorative justice and students' well-being.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into the after-school models also. Like, what do you mean by this 9.5 million for after-school models? What does that mean?
yeah, right now there's no district sort of central funded before after-school programs. And this is an area that the superintendent flagged when she first got here. And I think we'll continue. We want to be able to develop high-quality after-school, before and after-school programs at all schools. And so what that looks like may be different depending on the school, whether or not they have a YMCA that's close. In some of our schools, we have the Y as a partner. In some of our schools, like the Hurley and the South End, run their own program. And so part of that is
Like what the Murphy does with the Leahy Holleran sort of thing. They have the after-school there.
Exactly. So that could be one model where we partner with BCYF at adjacent sites. And then, so that's that mixed delivery model. And again, probably an opportunity for us to think about local businesses, minority women-owned businesses as well, to be able to support an after-school program.
Yeah,
as well.
so that's in just those two things that I mentioned there, 9.5 million and 6.5, that's 17 million bucks. And you know, I talked to you about the field house, that's a real hub school model. Crickets from the school department, from across the hall here, that's something real. How come we can't, like, is there 5 million in there for the field house like I asked you for? No, that's a no, I got ya. But you see what I'm saying? We're still gonna use all this building, whatever programming, we're building programming where Aaron talked about you're hiring FTEs, which becomes a liability when the ESSER money comes out. Not that there's a liability, we should have the money to hire the people that we need, but I just don't think we're serious about any of this here at all. When we have a project, when we have something like where we could do a real hub school model, where kids could come to the field house in the morning, get their breakfast, go to school, come back. First of all, in the middle of school, they could be running around in a gym or on a turf field. I don't get it. And I can't even, you can't even comprehend my level of frustration that no answers, no, but like, it's been called, I think someone that was doing Zoom testimony was calling it a racist program. Like Why can't we buy into something like this? Why can't we make the Devon McCormick something real? We're gonna turn it into a high school next year, but we're not expanding the footprint of the building at all. We're not doing anything for the building at all. So we're now gonna put high school aged and sized kids into a middle school. Totally, and what we're doing to them is not right. And then to have no answer on, like, I think if we, it's not just you, it's me, it's across the hall, and invested in something like this, one-time payment, the thing would be built in 2 years if we could get commitments. And that would be real programming. That would build real programming that would speak to after-school meals, hub model, youth mentoring. It would speak to mental health supports. It would speak to a whole host of things. But nothing. You know, and there's my frustration. 400 million here, which I'm sure you're gonna do a whole lot of good with, but I'm sure there's gonna be a whole lot of waste in there. You know, all contracts going out, not building anything, with some school improvements, which is good, 57 million. But and the chair knows where I am. I think that we in the city of Boston are missing huge opportunities at the way we're blowing through this money. That's you and the ESSER money, not you, but the school department on the ESSER money, and us, city side on the ARPA money. I don't see very many investments that we're gonna be able to look at in 20 years, 30 years, and it's gonna be there. You think a website that we build here for whatever is gonna, website redesign right here, engaging families, is that gonna be there in 40 years? No, it's not. A building that we build that brings real programming in for a hub school model. I'm totally on board with the hub school model because most of the kids that especially after coming out of COVID now, they're gonna need a lot more services than that fourth grader. That was a fourth grader 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't think we're speaking to any of it. That was a finite statement. I'm hoping that we're speaking to some of it. But without doing things like the field house that would be connected to the Devon and the McCormick, I think we're missing opportunities. So, I mean, it's good you have 400 million to be able to do what you want to do there, but I'm not on board. You know, I think that the school department should be at least looking at the field house, at least coming to me and saying, yeah, that's awful, that's terrible, stop talking about it. But it's quiet, it's crickets from school department, from mayor's office.
The one thing I think the sort of goal of having investments that you can look back on in 40 years, you know, I will say that what we want to be able to do is at the end of ESSER to look back and say, this is the impact we had. And the superintendent has said before, we should have some sort of badging where you can say this was paid for by ESSER so people understand the impact of how we use the funding. So the team is constantly looking for ways to be able to be able to assess our impact and be able to say, this is the last thing change that was made. It is easiest to do on physical infrastructure investments. The limitations on ESSER for infrastructure, building improvements, capital projects, is it has to be directly related to the COVID sort of mitigation.
So how is a field house that's gonna help kids get through the issues that they're all gonna have? How is a field house that's gonna provide them with we're not talking basketball and soccer here. We're talking kitchens, we're talking music rooms, we're talking production rooms, we're talking quiet rooms so kids can do their homework. How is that not impactful?
I think that's more of a question for DESE or the federal government in terms of the guidelines that they put on ESSER. I will say part of our investment in...
It seems like, let me cut you off there, it seems like at every turn, because I look at something like the field house, and this is personal to me because it's in my district, it's in an area of town that has been in the news for being underserved for 50 years. First grade, I was bused to the Deva school. I was over there 50 years ago. It's exactly the same, remain the same. The field that people are saying is green space is the same as it was 50 years ago, wasted space. But yet, we're gonna say, oh no, that doesn't fit into this box here, and it's the same with the ARPA money. It looks to me like it fits in every box, every guideline or guardrail that you want, whatever name we wanna put on. Looks like it fits in all of them, but can't get any buy-in any place. So, I'm just frustrated, and again, 400 million, right around, send them all home. We have no idea where this 400 million's going. We think we do, we hope we do, but we really don't. I've been listening to the school department for 10 years. I'm surprised you were only 10 pages here. That's normally you come out with like a 70-page document to put everyone asleep here, and then we forget all our questions, is normally what happens. So I appreciate the small presentation here, so we can at least stay awake for it, but it's just, I don't know, lost opportunities, blown opportunity, I think. So, do with it what you want. And also, my last question, why are we spending city-side money on electrified buses? Can you answer that? Kind of out of your purview. So in the ARPA money, we've got 2.5 million going to electrification of BPS buses, buying buses basically. Why are we using ARPA money to buy assets for you when you have 400 million?
The investment on the city side for the, and I'm just pulling up the information right now to make sure I'm not misspeaking. It's about the infrastructure for, the infrastructure to be able to support electrified buses, which is not eligible for ESSER funding. And so we couldn't use the ESSER money to be able to do the electrification support. And so I think as part of the overall city's goals for sustainability, that's why this program's coming on. So it's not a, we would do it as part of either our capital budget, which is of course the city's capital budget, or they're prioritizing it for ARPA.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. The bell's gone off 3 times.
Thank you.
Councilor Coletta, and then it'll be Councilor Worrell, and then Councilor Fernandez-Henderson. Councilor Coletta?
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, and I've been anxiously waiting, but appreciate my colleague's passion for the field house and other issues in his district. Bye, Frank. So my first line of questioning is gonna focus on central office, and thank you all for being here. Hello, nice to meet you. So there's currently a $2.3 million increase in the operating budget to pay for additional positions in the central office. Do I have that right? I know this is a line of questioning, but is it 2.3?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds right. I don't have that same number in front of me, but yeah.
Okay. We are, as we all know, we're struggling to retain and recruit teachers, paraprofessionals, bus monitors, and nurses that are necessary for a well-functioning school. There are significant vacancies that have yet to be filled, and we need to spend, in my opinion, every dollar on our teachers and in our classrooms. And so in my opinion, what I've heard in my district is that there's a lot of bloat in central office when it comes to personnel and administration. And it just seems like, and I won't speak for anybody, but others on this body that have said that there's deputies on deputies, and then a deputy to oversee the deputy, and it's just like, it's a big web of positions. And so my specific questions when it comes to ESSER, so there's 2. How many positions has ESSER funded in the central office, and how much has been spent already? And what is outstanding to be spent in the central office moving forward when it comes to ESSER funds?
Yeah, the question about central office spending has been one that comes up annually. I mean, I've been on the finance team for now almost 10 years, and it's a favorite target of us on the budget side to try and balance our budget. You need a high-quality central office to be able to support schools and support teachers, especially as we talk about the expectation on teachers to do more. What we want to do is take out all of the work that is keeping teachers and principals from focusing on instruction and provide those high-quality supports. Sometimes that looks like central office. Sometimes that's coaching support to be able to offer teachers high-quality professional development and implementation support for equitable literacy. Think of it like a coaching staff for any high-performing athletic team. It's obviously about
What is the ratio of the coaching staff to the teachers, though? I mean, it seems like there's a lot. I mean, if you just have an answer to how many positions that ESSER has funded in central office, I would appreciate that.
Sure, we can pull up that information
And how much has been spent?
approximately 42 million is encumbered or expended. So encumbered funds are funds that are committed where the work is being done, we haven't received a bill for it. And expended is where we have received a bill and paid it out. So 42 million is the amount that's been expended in on ESSER Part 2. We're closing the books on CARES Act, and most of the first part, ESSER 1, is fully spent.
Okay.
So you can see it's a relatively small portion, to your point earlier about the number of vacancies and time it takes to start up and do expenditures on major projects.
Okay. In addition to the $2.3 million that was allocated this year in the operating budget for personnel.
So the 42 million is across all sort of school spending, central spending, the total percentage of the grant. The 2.3 million you're asking is specifically about central office.
Yeah.
The breakdown of central office versus school-based spending. Do you have that information?
In terms of breakdown of central office and schools, we have to get.
Yeah, I'm going to need to get back to you in terms of you're talking about purely central office
Purely
FTEs.
central office, yeah, personnel.
I'm going to need to get back to you in terms of that number.
Okay, thank you. My second line of questioning is about. So, well, let me start off just by saying that we obviously want this to invest in our students and their well-being, and that's the whole point of these funds. And through the lens of public health, when we're talking about access and improvement to open space for exercise and enjoyment, in East Boston, we have overlapping issues of a lack of open space, and a lot of these kids don't have backyards. And so my two questions are, how much of this money will be going into open spaces like playgrounds and athletic fields? And specifically, how much will you be able to commit to investing in the O'Donnell School Playground before the end of the year? Thank you.
In terms of so most of what you're talking about in terms of investments in facilities, open spaces would be a part of our capital budget plan, not part of our ESSER spending.
So you're not providing, so improve school environments, yeah, and that is why I asked, because I didn't see any, I just saw repairs and maintenance.
Right.
I didn't see any investments into open space, even though I do think that it does align with the goals of this money. And I would like to see this money be used for things that we can physically see, right? Including playgrounds, and including the O'Donnell School Playground, which I still have yet to get an answer for. So I don't know if anybody has an answer here.
I don't have the answer in terms of the budget for the O'Donnell School Playground. I can get back to you in terms of that. That's a capital project. Yeah, the investment in school environments is focused on the air quality and AC investments, and then again, as you mentioned, building maintenance and repairs. It's not an investment in things like playgrounds or athletic facilities, though those are focuses on us for capital projects.
I was hoping to get you to say yes, so I didn't trick you. But anyway, that is my line of questioning, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Councilor Coletta. Councilor Royal?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to BPS for attending and all the great work that you do here in the city of Boston. My question is around the data. Is there any investments being made to make student data around progress, accessible to the students, the parents, and to the public?
That's a great question. I know that we've worked with the Office of Engagement around, and I'm trying to think of the name of the program. You may know, where working with families and students to understand their academic data and use it better to help guide their own academic planning. That was something that the family engagement team has been doing for a while, not ESSER related. So I do think it's a critical part for students to be able to navigate their own data and learn from it and help shape their response. In terms of, I'm not sure if they're, go ahead.
So there is a roughly $3 million ESSER investment into our data systems and dashboards. If I see you're looking for it, so under the deliverable equitable access and opportunity, it's under that bucket. And so there is an investment there.
Okay, and will we be, because you said in some of these investments, we show progress monitoring and progress measurement. So would that system, show the map reading assessment data, the math assessment data? What information would be on that platform?
So I'm just trying to see. So it's updating data systems and dashboards so we can better use data at school districts. So it's decision-making, monitoring progress, and providing a coherent picture of schools, but you're asking for the specific data that would be available.
Right.
I just know it's academic data. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you could get back to us, that I would appreciate that. And through your process in your slide, how we came to investments, we said analysis of data. Can you talk to me about who was involved in the analysis of data? Council Mejia always says we're, resource rich but collaboration poor. You have higher institutions like Harvard, BU, NU, right in our backyard. So can you talk to me about who helped, analyze the data to ensure that we are making the right investments, when it comes to our students, our young people, our future?
I think part of the ESSER team's approach was to first review a lot of the research that's been done in Boston. As you mentioned from some of our great academic partners here, there's been no shortage of studies that get published on what we need to do. So it was accessing that work that was already done. They also commissioned an additional research project from the Rennie Center that provided us with information that helped guide the plan. The other piece that the ESSER team did in terms of request for each department to be able to request a specific investment, they had to identify what the research base and the data they were using to design that intervention. So it was both a sort of system-wide across where are we looking, where are gaps, where does the superintendent want to prioritize the execution of her vision, and then also each individual department, when they came to us and said, we want an investment and put a proposal together, that proposal had to have a research base and data that came along with it. And so that was the kind of mix of like both sort of across sort of consistent data analysis, but then also individuals sort of from the ground up bringing the data.
We also partnered with REL, the Rennie Center, to be able to look at our data and make some suggestions as well. So we did partner with some external researchers too.
Awesome. And is that available to the public, the Rennie Center report?
It is.
Awesome. And then the application, based, what you was talking about, Nate, to advocate for the investment, is that available to the public as well? Or can that be shared with the council? Like, for example, for the Frederick, I see that there is an investment for equitable literacy. So what data were they looking at in order to get that investment for equitable literacy?
We, for each individual school, part of the alignment was with their quality school plan. The quality school plan is a school-based sort of annual process where they look at their data and identify their student needs and then develop their strategic plan. And part of what the team did was make sure that schools were aligning to that quality school plan. Those quality school plans are not sort of owned and managed by our team. It comes out of the academic side of the house, and I know that's something that we, if it's not public already, we're working on how to make sure that people have access to those, so you can see the Frederick Quality School Plan aligned to their ESSER investment. Is the kind of that would give you the answers that you're looking for an individual school.
Yeah, because I'm excited for the investments, but also it leads me to start thinking, what is the baseline happening at the Frederick? Where are our students currently now, so that we can also be making sure that we are making progress. So I love that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that could be shared.
And it has been one of the challenges with the school-based investments, just as sort of a little bit of an aside, but there was a lot of pressure on us on the team to get money out to schools so they could spend it immediately. But there's also, we knew that we were going to have hearings like this, and then we were going to look at the end of it and want to be able to look back and say, well, what did individual schools do, and how are we sure that they were strategic in their investment? So we took the slow down, we're in a hurry approach, which was we really needed schools to show us how they were aligning their investments to that quality school plan. It frustrated some of our school leaders because they wanted to spend it now, they wanted to spend it quickly. And so that was part of the delay that you may have heard from frustrated school leaders, where we were asking them to say, take us from this document, the quality school plan, to this investment, walk us through it, and once we see that alignment, the funding came and they could begin spending it. That was our goal, was to do exactly what you're saying, is to make sure that it's anchored in the data, it's anchored in a deep understanding of their students, and it's not just either quick spend or knee-jerk reaction to what they were thinking at the time.
Yeah, I would love to see the data, just to kind of get an understanding of our schools, especially the ones in my district. And last question is, any investments in Voc Tech and other schools other than Madison? I believe that Voc Tech should be an option, in many more schools. But is there any investments in ESSER funds for pilot programs or any new initiatives for Voc Techs on other sites?
Yeah, there is career and technical education programs at multiple high schools, not just at Madison Park. And there is an overall goal to have access to more career and technical pathways at our high schools. It's part of what the team has been dubbing their core four. The four pieces, one of the four is career and technical pathways and expansion. In terms of an ESSER investment for CTE, I'm not sure. I'm looking at through to see, is there, or is that mostly on the operating side?
I think it's mostly on the operating side.
So there's not currently an ESSER explicit plan to expand programming for CTE.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the panel.
Great, thank you, Councilor Worrell. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you please clarify for me exactly what did you mean by we don't have a vote on this?
So because the federal government sent ESSER funds directly to the school department, basically they're only subject to appropriation by the school committee. We don't actually get a council vote on this ESSER plan.
And so the point of us discussing, do we have input or some sort of collaboration in how it's being spent?
So what I would say is that I think a number of us wish we had a more direct appropriating power here, but we've been asking. I think it's safe to say Nate's been getting inquiries from me about the ESSER spending for a year and a half, because obviously I think from the council's perspective, like, it does interact, as several councilors have alluded to the way that we're spending the American Rescue Plan funds that we do have appropriating power over, and then also there's a sense that the things that we start doing at the school department now, there will be expectations of continuing 3 years from now when they're in front of Ways and Means talking about their operating budget. So what I would say, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, is that this hearing reflects more our desire to be involved, as opposed to us having like a really clear avenue for being involved. And I think that that's an ongoing topic of conversation between the council and the administration.
So they don't need you to recommend a pass on this?
They do not, no.
And then how long have you been waiting for them to create a plan again?
I mean, I think I first started asking about it as soon as the federal government sent the money our way, which, as is noted in their documents, the money's come in a staggered way. Some of it came in like a while ago, some of it came in this fall, some of it I think came in this winter. Is that right, Nate?
The original CARES Act funding was from, 2020, and then ESSER Part 2 and 3, we were notified of our allocation 18 months ago, 16 months ago.
Right. So we actually tried to have this hearing a year ago in budget process, and the school department was not ready to share an ESSER plan. And so, yeah. That's,
So,
Yeah, I realized there wasn't a question, so I didn't mean to jump in.
yeah, well, I understand that the BPS's view is that you've needed all this time to run this extensive community process, which is how you've gotten where you are today. Totally understand. I think in terms of the context of like the last council to this council, I think it's been a continuing frustration of the councils that we don't really have eyes on this process and this money in a direct way.
now we have eyes on it, but it's just to look at it?
Well, I think that, all of us can do the political advocacy that we can do.
So the federal government sent money to the school department in Boston to spend money, and the council has no say? Okay, well, what are the parameters in which you have to spend this money?
I think there are multiple guidelines, and I'm going to turn it over to either Dr. McCrae or to Serena for to give how much details. There was a time frame that we're given, plus there are rules that are set forth first by the federal government and then interpreted by the state, and the state hands down guidelines. And so our primary communication in terms of clarifying guidelines and making sure that we're spending the money appropriately to the rules of ESSER is with our partners in the state. And so that they have been the ones who have helped us interpret and understand the guidelines around facilities and infrastructure investments, for example. Each of the 3 grants have different timelines for their spending in terms of when we have to spend it by. So for instance, CARES Act 2, where we received $123 million, we received access in fall of 2021, and our deadline to spend is September of 2023. CARES Act 3, which is $276 million for BPS, we received access to the funds in the winter of 2022, and we have until September 2024 to spend. And that's without any federal government extensions on any of those grants.
And then, some of this is for me because I am new, and some of this I think is so that I can explain to my constituents. And I want to understand exactly what you're supposed to spend this money on. What did they tell you? The state did some work to help you clarify, but what was it?
I will just say, in general, the guidelines were fairly flexible in terms of our goal. The broad stated goals of the funding is to be able to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on our community and to be able to spend it. And so there is flexibility in terms of, there are no restrictions in terms of hiring or, they gave us broad guidelines. I'm going to let Serena walk through some of the specifics, details of that guidelines.
I'm going to give you some specifics and then tell you where you could go if you want additional information.
Or you can answer more questions.
No, I am. Sure.
Thanks.
Either way. So the first thing is that it had to address the academics, social, emotional, and operational, all in response to the pandemic. Another piece is that 20% of ESSER 3 funds has to be on evidence-based strategies defined by DESE.
Where can I find the information you're reading? Is that in your presentation for today?
It's not in the presentation, but it is on our website. We can send it to you
if
where you can find the details of it. But yeah, I was just giving you some information.
Sorry, 20% is,
On, of ESSER 3 on evidence-based strategies as defined by DESE.
and
It
what else?
must have a connection to COVID, health and safety.
How many percent?
It doesn't have that percent.
Must
And-
have connection to COVID?
Uh-huh.
So overall?
Overall, health and safety and/or be directly related to providing academic, social, emotional, or other supports to students and families.
I see. And then, did they also talk about the population that was impacted by COVID and who to prioritize?
So each individual, so they did not, they do ask about a group of students, but we've identified ELs when we looked at the data and did community engagement. It was students with disabilities that were most impacted, our ELs, and then our low-income students. But
Can you say what ELs is for
I'm sorry.
people watching?
English language learners or English learners.
And then, so in your plan, do you have some sort of like metric to ensure that you're doing this correctly? Based on the criteria that they laid out for you?
In terms of correct, so there's, I think, two pieces of that. The first is,
The first is when and how, and if the other one is on who and what to prioritize.
yeah, so in terms of our technical compliance to make sure we're spending it on eligible expenses, that's part of our team's work. We do grant reporting to the state. There is a process by which they review our expenses and make sure that they're appropriate, including audits of our federal expenditures. This happens on Title I as well as all of our external funds to be able to make sure that we spend it on grant eligible expenses. The second piece, which I think the team has developed a great approach to, is making sure we're having the impact on the students that we wanted to. And so they developed an approach to identify the most critical investments to do implementation monitoring to make sure we're successfully implementing the program, and then outcome monitoring to be able to make sure that the program had the intended outcome on students. And so, you know, it's sort of like, did you run the summer school program? Did you intended to have 200 seats? Did you offer 200 seats? Did students enroll is the implementation question. And then what was the impact on those students? Did they, how much credit recovery was there? Or how much did they recover from learning loss is the outcome measure. Those are the two different pieces that we're doing.
And the current plan, obviously it's done under the current superintendent?
Correct.
And did you think that it was a good idea to wait for the new superintendent to have input? Did anyone bring that up?
This plan has been 16 months in development, and so it was,
But not ready until now?
the publishing of the final report is the timing is now. The work and the decision process that's been happening has been going for multiple months. And so,
So you could have presented in parts months ago?
and,
Because some of the stuff was decided on already?
and we have throughout the budget process been presenting on the parts that were announced and ready. It's sort of the full details and translated documents were available this week. The other piece is, this is not just a sort of one team developing the budget. When you're doing a school-based approach, there's 120 schools that are developing their plans. That process was started multiple months ago. The aggregating of that information and publishing it just took us time.
And since you did that, been showing it, been presenting it on the budget as you go, what efforts are you going to make then to work with the counselors so that pre-next budget, we're working collaboratively to ensure that there's accountability?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, and I always encourage feedback and look forward to future conversations. I think part of it is producing the full report so that you can look at the different parts and identify the ones that are critical for you or your constituents that you want to follow up on. And then we have committed to publishing multiple reports on our progress throughout. And so we can make sure that's available. Obviously, it'll be available publicly, but think of opportunities to come back and update the council in terms of our progress on the initiatives.
Final comment, if I may. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Nate, I think I'll be happy to provide that opportunity so that you can come back and work through working sessions in the next budget. And then we'll start it really early next time. We'll start it in January. We'll bring you to like a whole bunch of working sessions. So that way we can all work together and collaboratively. So we can make sure that the next time we pass your budget, counselors are not frustrated, and we understand that that was the best decision for now, or at least practical, right? But even if we don't have a say in this one, don't treat us like that. Come back sooner, talk to us, because now we're definitely gonna have an opportunity to talk to us, right? Because now, I mean, I'm coming in late and I see this, and we worked with you in good faith. I guess now I'm asking for that to be reciprocated. Moving forward, even if we have no say, you're gonna work with us because it's gonna be a part of the budget. Right? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you. I look forward to that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson. I have a couple more questions, but I'll go to my colleagues who've been waiting. So Councilor Murphy, and then it'll be Councilor Mejia.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to bring up what I like to bring up a lot is the athletic spending. And I know when we talked through the budget hearings, I shared out how we're only spending $78. And one of the facilities, athletics, when they came, they talked about an increase of $15 to, I think it's $93 now. But that increase is coming from ESSER funding, which says to me, which we talked about previously, this is not an investment. It's not something we value if we're only going to use temporary money. And that, as you can do the math quickly, comes out to 0.002455% of your $1.78 billion budget, because if you add the $450 million you have this year to spend, and if you're taking money out of that. So I'm just gonna leave that there, that's a disgrace, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't pass the budget. I did say no, because I did know that this would be time to go back and forth and make adjustments to make sure that our students were getting what they needed. So I just wanna make that statement. And I know Councilor Baker mentioned the small packet, which I do appreciate, and we did also get some emails with attachments, but there is the 180-page review report from DESE, which I hope we all did read. And I just wanted to mention a couple things in that report. And one of them is that only 25% of Black elementary school students in BPS are reading at grade level in English. So that means 75% of our Black students are not able to read on grade level. That's not okay. I mean, I know you know that, Nate, but it's not okay, especially with all of this money. It's also true, and they're not here now. I wish more of the councilors were here to hear a lot of this, because I don't know if everyone did read through this, especially because we passed the budget so quickly. A lot of questions have come up about our EL learning. As you know, I was ELL teacher, a special ed student, so I do understand the funding of it, but the report did say the impact that the English learners in the district are not consistently receiving their Tier 1 content instruction, as well as what they need is, as we know, systematic, explicit, and sustained ESL instruction. And without this, without clear expectations for their instruction, the quality of ESL in the district and the linguistic and academic achievement of students will continue to suffer. And if many of the students who unfortunately are part of this 75% are also EL students. So it's definitely something we need to not just do better, like we have to really fix this. And according to previous COVID, because we know COVID really made absenteeism worse, horrifying in many ways. There are kids who have fallen through the cracks, and the older grades have not returned. I don't know where they are. I hope we're all out there looking for them and making sure they're okay. But according to a previous state review before the pandemic, absenteeism was staggering. When a report uses the word staggering, that's not just a few schools have an issue with attendance that one family liaison can fix. So there's definitely things in this report and in the data that BPS has that we really need to address going forward. And we know, don't have to repeat all of it that we know, but the schools are failing our English learners and our special ed students, and the transportation system is a disgrace. This can't all fall on the new superintendent. We all know the timeline, and I've worked through several of them. There's going to be a new superintendent, but as a complete system, it has to be overhauled. And as a city, if we really do care about our students, even though the enrollment is declining and families are leaving, me as a lifelong city resident, a former teacher, and someone who's here to stay in the city, I do care about the students who either choose to be a BPS student or have to choose, because many families, if they can, choose not to be a student at BPS. So we just have to make sure that people are reading this data so they do understand that when people say no right away to a budget and stop a conversation that could maybe help funding go to supports that students need, that it's not that you're working against teachers, you're working against a union, you're not happy with, because I know the teachers who get up early and stay late and pour their heart and souls into their classrooms. But when the district is not aligning a curriculum to match what it should, and they're making choices about what is taught, teachers are working twice as hard and not getting the results that they deserve and their students obviously deserve. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Mejia?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. And I would just like for the record to state that my passage of the budget this year was in consideration for the turmoil that BPS find themselves in, not because I really felt that you all hit the mark. So I just want to be really clear about that. And that was your get out of jail free pass that you only get once a term from me, okay? Just so you know, that will not be happening again. So just want to be clear. And I also think that while I do appreciate Councilor Bach's continuous advocacy to get you guys in here, we've missed another opportunity to be yet again collaborative, right? As a citywide counselor, I serve 700,000 constituents across the city. As someone who worked in the education space, as a BPS parent, you know, we've missed opportunities to really lean into the sort of things that these dollars could have been allocated to and towards. And it is without needing to belabor the point, I think accountability is going to be very different. You know, we created a new committee called Government Accountability, Transparency, and Accessibility, which under that falls post-audit, right, Nate? And so we're going to change the way we do business, because I'm not going to wait until the next cycle of budget hearings through the Ways and Means process to learn and see how things are going. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of how we can support you in making sure that every single dollar that you ask for is being spent in ways that we are going to see that return on investment. Because I don't want to go through another cycle and get amazing PowerPoint presentations and be disregarded by the administration with very little respect for the little power that we allegedly have here on this council. So I think that we have an opportunity. to do business differently, and I'm looking forward to exploring what that's going to look like. I know this is about ESSER funding, which we have absolutely no power over, which is really unfortunate because, as Councilor Murphy talked about, chronic absenteeism was an issue before the pandemic, and it has become worse. And I'd like to see some investments in the Youth Development Network be shared with the Boston Public Health Commission. So I'm gonna put that on the record. I'd like to see the Boston Public Health Commission work alongside the Boston Public Schools because they are in your public schools trying to help your students graduate. So they're doing you a service. And so I believe you have an opportunity to invest in the Boston Public Health Commission Youth Development Network to support those efforts, to support those kids who are chronically absent and refusing to go back to school. If we're really serious about COVID relief, this is a great investment to make. The other investment, you talked about workforce development and career explorations, exponential learning for young people, right? Really thinking outside the box. If we want to pilot things, let's pilot things that help both give young people exposure and paid internships and opportunities for them to be able to explore different types of careers. Investments in that. Is there an investment in that? No. Yes or no?
No, but
Okay.
because there are limitations
Right.
to it, to be able to spend that way.
Oh, so it's because of a limitation.
Yeah, so a lot of schools were interested in that. If we could find a way to do that creatively, like that would be great. But yeah, it was a limitation as to why we weren't able to do it, not because we didn't want to do it.
Yeah, see, that's what I struggle with, is limitations. And those limitations are usually sometimes just whether we lack the will or the creativity to think outside the box about how do we meet the moment.
But the limitations are both from federal government that we couldn't use the funds for that.
Right.
For career explorations and
To pay students, anything.
and initiatives to that, earn to learn or create opportunities for young. So let's talk about that really quick then. From a mental health and wellness perspective, getting kids out of the classroom into, the field that addresses their mental health and wellness, right? Maybe they might not get paid for it, but there's opportunities for them to learn outside of the school. Is that a limitation? Because that addresses mental health and wellness. If you could learn at a museum, if you could learn in a park, if you can learn in other spaces, that helps your mental health and wellness, right? And that is connected to the COVID pandemic, right? So is there a limitation on that?
No, but it's also happening as well. A lot of schools have put field trips and things like that as part of their investments, and it was approved. Mind you, they weren't able to do it for a while because of COVID restrictions, but now they are, and it's part of it.
And I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Because I spent some time at various schools during my budget pop-ups. And did you know how difficult it is for a school to actually secure funds to be able to do an activity? Do you know that educators oftentimes have to come out of their own pockets to be able to provide children with enrichment? Do you know how difficult it is for them to get anything out of central office? Yeah. You should watch the video. I'll send it to you. That's it. I don't have any more questions other than just more frustration. But Counselor Bach, I so look forward to working alongside you on really helping to build something around the post audit, because I really do believe we have an opportunity to do business differently, and given your understanding of this world, I think I could benefit from your support in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Can you, Nate, walk me through a little bit what the approval process is on the school committee side? You guys had, like obviously, as you said, this plan's just come out in its full form and in translation. And I was noticing, like, on the school things, there was sort of a checklist that said, oh, this was approved at the school level and by the superintendent. Like, but are you guys presenting this ESSER, like, plan to school committee for, like, any kind of formal approval? And then also just the FY22 spending has all already happened to the extent that it happened. So I heard your point about the sort of hurry up and wait thing with the schools, but then how did school level money get spent this year in that case?
For each of our grants, the process that we follow is the school committee votes to accept and expend a particular grant. When we have the grants as part of our overall budget planning process, we'll often submit to them for consideration an approval for all of the different allocations that they'll vote on so that we can load and start managing the individual budgets. Once we have an approved allocation from the state, we then submit it to the school committee along with information around that grant.
So have you already gotten all your authorizing votes on ESSER from school committee?
We got the, yes, for us to accept and expend for the ESSER 2 and 3.
Okay, so you already got all of that. So it's all on the administrative side at this point?
Yes.
Okay, but are you expecting to present this plan to school committee, or what's the?
Yeah, the school committee has gotten presentations at different points on ESSER throughout the budget process. We presented in a similar fashion to City Council the combined FY23 plan so that they could see in concert what we're doing on the operating side and on the ESSER side. And then the school committee, as you know, they meet quite often and will be asking about different implementation questions around the ESSER as it relates to the individual departments that they're getting a presentation from and any given school committee presentation. The other thing is that we are working with the school committee to develop periodic grant updates as well as a grant outcomes report so that they can get a better sense of how we're spending and then the outcomes that we're getting for spending on external funds. That's not just specifically about ESSER, but it's about grants in general. And then the final thing I'll just add is we have publicly committed to this quarterly updates on ESSER. Those have been written updates, including this report. But at various points, we've talked about presenting to the school committee. I think it just depends on their overall agenda, what they have going on.
Yeah. How much, you mentioned that, I mean, there was supposed to be 200, I'm trying to get to it. Yeah, there was supposed to be 200 million in sort of these collective CARES ESSER dollars, and I guess, this includes the investments over FY20. I see. So the gray and the blue bars are operating dollars that were part of Mayor Walsh's commitment?
And Mayor Wu's commitment in the last year to bring it up to a total of 110 million. So the gray bar represents, so the blue bar is each annual increase in investment. The gray is what then becomes part of our operating, and the orange bar represents our planned spending of ESSER funding over FY22, 23, and 24, seeing that we're trying to create consistent spending each of those 3 fiscal years at about 130 million a year.
Right. So, and of that 133 for FY22, how much of it was actually spent? Because you mentioned that there are a number of positions we didn't succeed in filling and such. So since we're nearly at the end of the fiscal year, do you guys have a tracker on that?
So in this case, the end of the fiscal year for this grant would be August 31st because the grant runs through September. And so there's a lot of summer spending that will be included.
But do you have a sense?
So I can tell you the current spending to date for encumbered and expended is 42 million. So the year to date.
Okay, so, And so, I mean, say that that accelerated over the summer, which, I don't know, seems somewhat unlikely, but say that it did. And, you know, we got up to about 67, so we're like at half that 133. That's what you were referring to when you said that obviously the new superintendent's gonna come in with some monies that were not expended as originally planned, and so there's gonna be a kind of like plowing that back process. Is that right?
Well, some of it is for instance, the money that's set aside for the air conditioning
Yeah.
implementation. That set aside is by the end of the grant term, and it'll be spent as soon as, you know, all the contracts are in place and we're able to do
But
it. So it's-
presumably you hadn't planned to spend that this year. Like you hadn't realistically had a timeline that thought you were gonna spend it in FY '22. So you still prorated a portion of that into the FY '22 ESSER spend?
Yeah, for part of it, that's, yeah. I mean, most of the 133, in terms of the smoothing, if we're really to think about it, you could look at it by fiscal year, or you could look at it by sort of the spending category that I mentioned, those one-time costs.
Yeah.
We tried to project out that 20 million in spending as best we could in terms of, I think it was 5 million in the first year for that, with the 15 million coming in the second year. I'm just saying, part of that is just an estimated
Yeah.
and less important in terms of cash
I
flow.
guess the question that I would have, as a follow-up would be sort of like, so there are certain types of spending that if we didn't do them this year, like they just didn't happen, right? So say we said we were gonna hire a literacy coach for all 3 years, and we never filled that position in FY '22. We're not gonna pay the literacy coach double their salary next year. So that, like, one coach's salary for the year is sort of like, oh, we planned on that, but it's not happening. So from my perspective, that money would become sort of like newly unencumbered, and there would be a conversation about how to spend it by deadline. So it would be
Yes.
helpful to understand, like, like how much money that we actually anticipated was gonna be spent in FY '22, leaving aside, like you're saying, like money where, okay, we misgauged how many of the air conditioners we could get in, but we're still gonna spend them all, right? So it's still fundamentally encumbered. Like how much money is getting kind of like freed up just by the fact that we didn't manage to execute on the thing in this year? So that's a follow-up question. I don't expect you to calculate that.
And you're
immediately.
asking across all of the ESSER investments, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I do think, to the point about council collaboration, and also like you guys are gonna get feedback on this from all kinds of people, right? I mean, the reality of a process is that no matter how much outreach you do, there are still people who only find out about the thing once you're announcing it, right? And you're gonna put this up in 10 languages, and there's some people who say, like Councilor Mejia said, like, hey, it doesn't feel like enough of this is dedicated to getting the kids who are not coming back to school, back in school, right? So I think it would be relevant for this body to understand, like, as people are articulating things that they wish that you guys were spending the ESSER money on, you know, is there actually 20 million, 30 million, like that sort of there's an opportunity to guess again on, you know, is sort of the question.
So the 42 million was just what was expended on the district side. So we had planned for 57 million there. In terms of the ESSER school investments, I think we spent roughly 20 million of that so far from as of May, but we're still getting data from schools. And they're submitting plans right now of how the year went, so we'll have that information a little bit later. But on the school front, their funds do carry over into the next year. We didn't want to take funding away from them. There is, for the community, the school innovation line and the community partnership line, that's the other two buckets, that was put on hold to work in collaboration with the new superintendent.
Sorry, say those two again?
The school innovation and then the community, those two are on hold. So we never planned to spend that for this year because we wanted to work.
You delayed it for that, yeah.
Correct.
No, and I would just say, you know, the other thing that we're all stressed about, and I'm sure you have a team stressing about, is just that obviously none of us want to get to the expiration dates of any of these monies and find that we haven't gotten them out the door, right? So, So I assume therefore that you guys are tracking money that might need to be repurposed so that we don't end up with money sort of sitting, and even with a school, even if they keep it, really talking to them about like, hey, do you have a plan to spend this, right? Like, I assume that that's a piece of your process, so I'm asking
That's
just
correct.
for some
Yeah.
insight into that piece.
So I would just say, from a financial perspective overall, ESSER aside, this has been one of the most difficult periods to forecast expending. I've worked in finance for 10 years, and the number of unpredictable factors that have come into play over the last 2 years has made forecasting our spending for the full 1.3 billion, 4
Yep.
billion harder, right? We've had inflation this year much higher than anyone would have guessed. We've had staffing shortages and challenges that lead to underspending. We've had staffing shortages that lead to overspending in our food nutrition services. We've had to adapt a lot. And so what we have been trying to do is continuously improve our forecasting, but looking at historical trends, which has been what has made our budgets very predictable in past years, has not worked in the last 2 years. The other piece is we're trying to ramp up and spend a new host of dollars and do the planning side with the same staff that you're asking for us to do the expenditure side. So we are continuing to monitor spending. We are continuing to invest in tools to do better forecasting. What we will do is close out the current fiscal year for the operating budget and then turn and close the grants. And all of these work in concert. It's not just ESSER underspending or overspending. We'll also be looking at overspending and underspending on operating side, and then our other federal grants and competitive grants as well.
But do you expect to transfer monies from ESSER to resolve overspending on the operating side?
No, but the interesting challenge that we have now is with the number of vacancies is what we try to do is fully expend all of our funds that are time limited
Yep.
in the first year to create flexibility in future years if we can. So for instance, our entitlement grants, Title I, for example, is always a 2-year grant. If
Yep.
you don't fully expend
Yep.
the 35 million.
No,
or so.
I'm familiar with the game of really trying to make sure, that we've used every dollar. I just think that what I'm asking is not about forecasting. I'm not asking you to predict something. I'm saying that I think you guys must, at various junctures in your fiscal year, have a sense of how much ESSER money you have left,
Yes.
right? Like, and then where there are, and then when there are things that like you now need to figure out to do with that money, right? Even if it were to say, oh, there's an operating expense that's actually ESSER eligible and we're over budget there, so we actually really want to put it to that, like that, like
Right.
judgment neutral on what you're doing with it. I just think that this is like, one of the conversations we're having on the ARPA dollars is the need to get them out so that they can be spent, because what we don't want is any of them hanging over. And regardless of who has authorizing authority, like the council definitely doesn't want to be in a position where it's September 2024 and we find out that like everybody tried their best but spending was unpredictable and we sent 200 million. I mean, that won't happen, but like we sent some, frankly 20, right? Like $1 million back to the federal government. So just flagging that I think it would be good to have some circle back on that.
Yeah, and I think, another lesson learned, so I started as budget director 10 years ago at the end of the ARA funding and Race to the Top, where we didn't spend money as a district early in the grant. It was again a 3-year grant.
Right.
And so there was massive spending in year 3 that created a greater fiscal cliff for us.
Right.
I often sort of joke of the way my grandparents lived through the Great Depression, and they always saved and reused aluminum foil is the way I approach budgeting. It's like that year was so difficult, and that was a much smaller percentage of our budget.
Right. Yeah,
so
this is like 14%.
Your point is not lost on me, and as somebody, I'll sort of mimic the way Councilor Murphy said it, as somebody who lives in Boston, who sends their children to the Boston Public Schools, who plans to be employed in the Boston Public Schools as long as she'll keep me around. This is something that we are taking very seriously to both spend quickly, strategically, and to move as much spending early as possible so that we don't end up in year 3. I will also say, and Yvonne has been great about participating in the National Network of Council of Great City Schools to advocate for a 4th year of spending to be able to create that flexibility. To
What do we
push.
think the prospects of that are?
It has gone up and down over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
So call your congressman.
Can I ask quickly, so one thing is, like, the committee wants, and we will follow up on this, like, actual budget docs here. Like, I should not have to scroll through an 80-page document and find every time that the word FTE is mentioned and, like, try to figure out how many people we're hiring with this money. Like, I understand that that there are certain, like, contexts in which this narrative is what we want, but there are also contexts in which what we want are spreadsheets. And so both in terms of the school allocations and also the district allocations, I think I've been asking every time we've talked about this, about the personnel versus like stuff versus contracts breakdown. And it's frustrating to like still not have it today. So I'm sure you have it because you have to have it. So not asking you to create something new, asking you to share with the council, like the sort of back end of how you think about that. Like for instance, like what is the actual FTE number across both barrels in this? Like, do you guys have that to hand right now?
The piece I'll just flag is as we do the implementation, that there will be money that's held, so that will be held in reserve or be held into account until we're ready to create the FTE. So I'll take as a small example, the athletics investments. The athletics investments will include an FTE for additional support or two to additional support the administration of the athletics program. Those FTEs are in the process of developing the job description to get them reviewed by comp and created. So if you pulled the budget as of today, you will not see that FTE in the budget necessarily because we haven't created the PC number and loaded it.
But don't you guys, but surely somewhere you have a budget authorization document where you talked about how many FTEs you were going to do with this money.
Each individual proposal has an FTE amount, and it is, it depends on, this process has been a little bit different than what we do with our operating budget where the FTEs are created. But even on that, we are forecasting anticipated creation of FTEs at a later point.
But the thing that you said to me earlier about the 139 FTEs and that sort of academic counseling bucket and the 71 FTEs and the pilot programs, like, led me to think that you had done some of the thinking that is what I would do in your shoes, which is the, like, how many of these things are, like, definitely temporary and it's not gonna be a problem for them to sunset versus, like, maybe temporary, maybe not, versus, like, oh, we definitely need to figure out how to build a bridge to here, right? It sounded like you had done that analysis, which you would need some kind of bird's eye view spreadsheet to do.
Yes.
Right. So that's what I'm asking for, so that we can understand what that, because again, it's basically a 3-year early conversation about the BPS budget, right? And this body, when there's actually like decisions being made at the school department that will affect the budget that this body is asked to approve in 3 years, it is totally reasonable for the council to want to understand what the scope of that is, right? And to understand it a little bit more than in sort of like verbal answers to questions, right? I think, so just, that is the follow-up that we'd like. And why, can you just give me a quick, people have sort of asked this, but like, why have we ended up only spending 4% of this on kind of like capital facility stuff? I think when the money initially came in, obviously we were in the throes of frustration about not being able to open our school buildings because of the concerns. And so I think, like, frankly, a lot of the sort of naive original assumption was that we would spend the lion's share of this on capital needs across our portfolio. And although the capital plan is substantial and the mayor's made a major commitment, right, to the schools, I mean, there's sort of like infinite need in the capital program for BPS. So what was kind of the global decision to not have a higher proportion of this go into capital needs?
I think part of it is the restrictions that were put in place for the grant overall, that the team has already highlighted in terms of the type of capital eligible expenses. The other piece has to do with the timeline it takes for capital budgeting and capital projects and the 3-year timeline of ESSER. So being able to get them, the projects scoped, designed, implemented There is an investment in capacity on ESSER to be able to get more projects done and leverage our capital budget more. So ESSER is.
Is that like is there a project management like piece?
There's project, and this
Where is that in here?
It's complemented with our operating budget as well, but it's the idea is we need to invest in the facilities condition assessment. We need to invest in our capacity to do capital projects. That's the critical investment right now, to get ourselves ready to move quickly on capital projects.
So sorry, you said it's complemented in the operating budget. Is there any actual ESSER money being spent on that capacity issue? So there's there's a needs assessment, right, which is key.
Sorry, let me just look. There's facilities repair on the second page of the proposal under improving school environments. You'll see the facilities improvement investments, the facilities staffing capacity, building quality assessment, facilities condition assessments, and then facilities repairs and maintenance is including the air conditioning investments.
Right. I just thought that the people there, from the way it read in the booklet, it kind of sounded like the people were to help do more facilities work, not like they were project managers or like improving our overall executing capacity. Is that, so when you say capacity, do you just mean more people to do the things?
Basically, but yes, I mean, the being able to do the building quality assessments is a capacity building activity that allows us to do better planning. And then the facility staffing capacity is more maintenance staff, more teams to be able to execute on the projects.
Yeah, it just seems like, yeah, there's a project management. I guess I think of like facility staff and project management of facilities projects as like two slightly different things, probably both of which we need.
And there is an investment on the operating side as well on project management staff for capital projects.
Okay.
To be able to execute.
How many was that? Sorry that I can't remember. And you mean specifically in BPS, or are you referring to the staff in PFG?
There's also staff on the PFD
Yeah, I know about
side.
that, but is there also staff on the BPS side on this? Because I guess I had missed that.
They're in various roles supporting increased capacity for planning and engineering, which is our capital planning unit, includes our capital planning unit. There are 6 positions being created to be able to focus on project management.
Got it. And just one more time to clarify this question of the types of buildings. So basically is the idea that the guidelines ended up saying like you can do like HVAC and air filters and like that kind of thing, but you can't do like others, like when you say the constraints of the, like what were the constraints that blocked us from doing more significant capital projects? Like presumably we
based
could
on our
have done it.
conversation with DESE, it was that the infrastructure spending would require a clear connection to health and safety, COVID recovery, and written justification would be needed for their review. We weren't able to do a sort of blanket approval for large things. We did work on the air conditioning. There were a lot of different facilities requests that we received from schools in the initial planning, everything from sort of furniture to improved outdoor learning classrooms, things like that. And so there was an approval process that would need to go. Each one project would require approval from DESE. It would require capacity from the central office.
Right.
And then once you get through that approval process, you have to be able to get the contracts in place, the spending done all by the end of the grant. And
I see.
you can see how this very quickly
I
raises
can.
a greater concern about our ability to spend on time.
I can't, although it still doesn't convince me that we couldn't have been like, we're gonna do windows everywhere, right? Like there are types of, we could have, I think, probably been like, that's not sort of a ask every school what they would like thing, that's more, but like, we probably could have identified like a type of capital expense that's like a clear tie to health and safety and done it district-wide or something.
Yeah, so in the first part of COVID recovery, we identified and did $7 million in windows. We're doing $20 million in air conditioning. We're also identifying across our capital plan multiple district-wide initiatives of that type. I think it becomes the sort of balance of, you know, where do we want to spend this one-time funding, and then where do we want to leverage our capital budget, and then where do we need capacity?
Yeah. All right, well, I've asked you guys lots of questions. I'll have many more, but look forward to getting that additional information, and we'll send along a formal request on that front. Yeah, and just, you know, stress, I continue to be just stressed about, it's like every job that it looks like we're adding here, it seems compelling to me, like in sort of a vacuum, in terms of the things that they're going to do, and especially like with literacy and ELL, where, I mean, it's just like, it's such important stuff. But I just really worry about us setting up like $180 million, like, swing in year 3. Just like, I really don't like the idea of having a ton of support staff and then setting up a bloodbath in terms of like whether we actually can keep them on. So just would really, I think we're gonna have to have continued conversation. I know it's something keeping you guys up at night, but I just wanna emphasize that I think it's something that's gonna stress many of us on the council out too. So we'll have to talk more about that. All right, so yeah, we'll follow up. I appreciate the all the detail that you provided, and you guys coming to us, and I know that as has been said, you know, obviously we wish that we had this sooner, but I also understand the dynamic of, like, you know, who do you consult first, and talking to community, and the amount of time that takes, and the sort of iterativeness of the process. I think you just have a lot of counselors who want to be involved in that iterative process, as you're hearing loud and clear. Did you guys want to say anything before I gavel us out? This is a working session, so we won't be taking public testimony.
No, I would just say I just want to thank the council. I know many of your colleagues have left, but we do always value the counselors, and in particular in the budget process, I know that the counselors represent the voices of many constituents across the city, and so that is a valuable part of our input. And while there is no formal vote that the council takes, the feedback that we get from counselors is incredibly helpful, and will inform our organization's planning going into the next fiscal year. So just appreciate you all, and thank you again for the vote on the FY23 operating budget.
Thank you, Nate. You're welcome, and I appreciate that. All right, with that, this working session of the Boston City Council's Committee on Boston's COVID-19 Recovery is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.